What do you think is the most undervalued quality of Bitcoin?
And then I do think that Bitcoin deserves a role in most portfolios.
What does Bitcoin really mean to you? Is it completely unlikely that Bitcoin will reach those all-time high levels again this year or even come near them?
I mean, if you had a total capitulation, like if you had a pivot in Fed policy and a reliquefaction of markets, it's a pretty high volatility asset. So you could have a pretty big swing up. You could retest some highs. But I think that's not the right way to think about it. I think when you look at Bitcoin, it's about what is the probability of where it is 3 to 5 years from now, and decide whether or not you want to have an allocation to it. So I view this as a good place for dollar cost averaging, and I view it as a very uncertain time for trying to forecast 6-12 month price changes.
Yeah. Have you been impressed by its performance compared to the traditional assets?
It's held up better than a lot of those ARK stocks, for example.
Yeah.
I think people that aren't familiar with its fundamentals, there are a lot of people on say FinTwit and macro people that are like looking at a chart of Bitcoin and like, oh yeah, it's about to do like, what Roku did, like, full round trip or stocks like that, Peloton.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you dig into the actual what's happening, who's buying it, why they're buying it, what are the fundamentals, I was like, I don't think it's going to capitulate as far as you think, in terms of like some of these other stocks have done. They were just inherently overvalued. And so I think it has held up better than a lot of those tech stocks. And I think that's probably going to continue, even though, I have no idea if we've actually seen the bottom or not. I mean, we've seen a pretty significant capitulation.
As far as just people who are investing, maybe some of them have the majority of their wealth in Bitcoin, maybe some of them are new, what's the best advice in terms of portfolio investing in this type of environment, which so many people haven't experienced since, the 70s there wasn't high inflation?
I mean, I think everybody's going to have a different approach. Mine is to be diversified, right? Because, if you're not over allocated any one asset, it gives you serenity to kind of just move through the environment. And so a 60-40 portfolio is not great because both broad stocks and bonds are basically, they benefit from disinflation. They want yields going down, they want commodity prices to be low. Whereas I think if you enter a more stagflation or inflationary decade, you want a better mix. So you maybe want equities, but you want more value-oriented healthcare, energy producers, pipelines, things like that. You want commodity exposures, some cash for, capitulation events, rebalancing, things like that. And then I do think that Bitcoin deserves a role in most portfolios. And then how much depends on maybe how many hours they put into understanding it, what their conviction level is, what is their tolerance for volatility. And that can vary dramatically. I mean, some people might want to put 1 or 2% in the Bitcoin. Other people might want to have half their portfolio in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think that I'm not going to tell people what to do.
Yeah, but get off zero. All right, to start to wrap up, I feel like I've seen a transformation in folks like you and Michael Saylor between before when you didn't really know about Bitcoin and when you really went down the rabbit hole, and now it's a part of your career to discuss Bitcoin and help educate the public. What does Bitcoin really mean to you?
Well, I think given that we're at the Oslo Freedom Forum, I think the best thing to focus on is the human rights implications. Basically, that it can do things. For example, if Bitcoin didn't exist, I'd be talking probably about gold, right? So that's prior. If you have a stagflationary environment, it's generally those commodities and like the harder monies that hold up well compared to equities or fiat currencies. But now, because we have Bitcoin, we have a competing asset to gold, right? So you can talk about gold and Bitcoin together or competing or however you want to look at it. But then unlike gold, Bitcoin also has a role throughout the world of, peer-to-peer payments. Basically what we've done, or what Satoshi did was, prior to 2009, if I wanted to send money to you long distance, I had to go through an intermediary, a centralized intermediary. And, he basically made it so that, for the first time, there's global peer-to-peer money. And that just kind of changes the rules about how all this works, assuming it gets big enough and widespread enough. And so I think it actually has pretty profound, implications for how the global financial system is structured and what it means for people that historically have not been able to save. Most people in the world can't buy the S&P 500. They can't buy the stock markets that have multi-decade stretches just going up in real terms. They can buy local real estate, which is illiquid, non-fungible. They can try to get their hands on dollars. They can buy the local currency. They can buy some gold, but it's generally just not a lot of options. If you're in weak currency environments or weak areas of rule of law where they can just freeze your bank account or things like that, and this just gives them a tool that I think, the more people are aware of it as an option, the better.
What do you think is the most undervalued quality of Bitcoin?
Probably its payment aspect, right? So it's been pretty well, I think, understood now for its scarcity, the whole 21 million cap. But I think there are still large swaths of people in developed markets that are like, what could Bitcoin possibly solve? Like, I just use PayPal. Like, why do you need Bitcoin? And it's like, people have to go outside of their bubble. I went to Norwegian Parliament yesterday, and we had a number of people from Nigeria with us, and they were telling their stories, and she was saying like, my bank account was frozen because I was protesting police violence, and so I had to start using Bitcoin to go around that and keep my finances open. And when people hear that, a lot of people just haven't thought of that. Their mind's blown.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that more people in developed markets have to understand. And I think it's not surprising that Chainalysis is like a crypto adoption index. The top 20 countries, 19 of them are developing countries, and then there's the United States because we're weird. But it's 19 developing countries, and it's because the benefits are more obvious to them. It's much easier to explain to an Argentinian why they might want to hold some Bitcoin or some stable coins compared to trying to convince an American or someone in Norway why they might want to, because we have certain freedoms and certain stability with our currency that a lot of these other countries don't have.
All right, well, Lynn, we are living in crazy times, both in good and bad ways. A lot of people, I think, are a little bit nervous about the sell-off, the price dips, the corrections, the fact that we're in a bear market. So just final takeaways for the folks out there that are kind of shaking about the fact that we might be in crypto winter.
I think, well, one, that's a good time to build, right? So a lot of the things that we see do well in bull markets were built during bear markets, And so I think that's one thing to focus on. And then two, if someone's bullish on the asset, that's a good time to accumulate. A lot of people don't want to buy into the spike high. They want to buy when things are low and chopping along and no one's talking about it. So I think it depends on making sure you have the right time horizon, and then making sure you have the right risk exposure so you're not overexposed to something that you don't fully understand or that you're concerned about the volatility of.
Well, thank you so much. I wish that I had a fortune teller, let me know that it was going to dip this much, because I would have waited maybe on some of my purchases, but it doesn't matter in the end, right? Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.